So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to talk about your posture at setup. Now, I'm a big believer that the posture isn't like there's no like perfect position that you need to be in, but I'm certainly not a fan of extremes. Oftentimes when I say a player's posture get out of position, this can be really detrimental because it can limit what your body is able to do later on in the golf swing. Meaning if you're falling out of position at a certain point in the golf swing now, it's just going to restrict your ability later on to move the way we would like. So what I dislike at this current moment is you have a little bit too much knee flex. You have a very squatty lower body, so lower half here. And then you kind of compound that with an upper body that is very bent over and hands and arms that are arguably retracted inside the shoulder line here. So this kind of extreme posture is going to be very challenging for a few reasons. Number one, when we get too squatty, we put so much pressure on the legs, and certainly in this case, the pelvis being too far behind you, that our balance points are going to be off, meaning, we're either going to get the weight too extreme on one side, too extreme on the other, depending on how you're compensating for it. And then as soon as our balance points are off and our weight distribution is not neutral or centered enough, it makes it very difficult to rotate. But then the second thing is when we have too much of a bend to the knees, now we're applying so much pressure to our quads and our hamstrings that it becomes very difficult to rotate on the way back. Because what a lot of people don't realize is when we rotate our hips on both sides of the golf ball, it's not necessarily just our hips that are rotating, our knees are very much moving as well. And this is something that I'll show you visually. So the reason why I mentioned this is a problem in your specific case is because what you are going to see here, if I put a circle right down on where your hands are, you're going to see a lot of outward, disconnected, upright takeaway to the hands and arms. Your hands are actually pushing away from you in your takeaway here, right? They're not working around your body. But of course, if we were to rotate our body efficiently, you would get the hands and arms to move around you. The only difference in your case is that you have a very restricted hip turn. And because the hips aren't opening up, it's hard to bring the hands around you. So instinctively, your hands are going to try to create space. They're going to push away from you. So this disconnected takeaway, right, where the hands are actually moving away from you, a lot of it can come from the fact that your hips are not opening up in the backswing properly. But believe it or not, the reason, obviously not the only reason, but a big reason why your hips are not opening up properly in the takeaway is because of the excessive knee flex you have. It just puts too much pressure on you. And so right off the bat, I would love to clean up the setup, not just because of the position of the setup itself, but rather because of how it's going to affect everything else later on. So I would love to see you remove just a little bit of knee bend. I would love to see your upper body get much taller. And then I would love to see your hands relax right underneath the shoulder line. And naturally, the shaft angle is going to get a little bit more upright when you do it because your hands are going to sit a little bit taller, just instinctively when your upper body is a little bit more upright, instead of having so much knee flex being so hunched over. The only other thing of the setup position that long-term is concerning to me is your chest tends to align a little bit open, but we're going to not actually change your setup with your chest position just yet because I would like to just start with your upper body and lower body's alignments relative to each other, get the balance points figured out, and then if we need to open or close any part of your body rotationally in the setup, we'll do that, but you're going to leave that part alone for now. From there, again, everything relates back to that second point, which is hands disconnect and work out and away from you. And so by this point here, they call this position 3 in the backswing. So when your left arm is parallel to the ground here, your hands are still completely out and over your toes. They just have not worked around you nearly enough. This contributes to a big part of the steep factors that you experience. You mentioned that you're not somebody who films yourself very often, but you saw it and it looked very steep recently. Big reason for it is just because of the lack of hip turn, which we can contribute some element of that to the setup. And the lack of hip turn creates this very upright hand path where it gets disconnected and moves vertically. Your hands never work around your body enough. So by the time you get to the top of your backswing, your arm plane is just way too upright and your hands are completely over the toes of your feet. And again, a lot of this has to do with the hip turn and how it moved early on. In an ideal world, we would get the arm structure a little bit more neutral, a little bit what we would call deeper, which basically just means flatter, so more behind you. And we would do this by actually opening up the hip turn earlier so that in the takeaway, rather than your hands going in this fashion, they would instantly start to work around you and end up in a better spot at the top. And that would be done by opening up these hips a little bit sooner. So by the time we get to the top of the backswing, we have a little bit deeper right hip. We're standing obviously a lot more upright. The arm structure is a little bit flatter. Because now, obviously, when your hands are just not nearly behind you enough, when you're coming down, they're going to get out in front of you. When they get out in front of you, the shaft is going to be coming down super steep. And obviously, when you come down super steep, you're asking for all sorts of compensations to happen. And this kind of leads to the last point. The last point with one of the questions you had was like, how can I possibly swing to the right when the shaft is so steep? Believe it or not, we can easily do a lot of compensations from here to get this club to drop in. Because in reality, if you tried rotating and staying in your posture and getting the hands to exit left and do all these really good rotational moves, your hands would end up even more in front of you, and this club would actually get way over the top. You would cut across it like crazy. The reason you don't cut across it is because your body does things to try to keep this hands and club in, and that obviously causes you to stand up. So you're going to see from here, you can see where your head is and where your spine is, and then look coming into the golf ball how much your head and spine back up. So that like jumping up and back with your head and your chest and everything rounding out and getting taller, that's your body reacting to the steepness of the club and the fact that these hands are too far out in front of you, and it's the only way you can make it work. And then obviously you jump up and back, and then you deliver this very, very upright handle at impact. So when you see your shaft angle at impact and you see how much flatter it is in the setup, of course, it's normal to have the shaft come in a little bit taller at impact for most golfers, but it shouldn't be this extreme. The only reason it's this extreme is because you're coming down way too steep. Handle rises through impact to try to swing from the inside when you're standing out of it. And when the handle rises, that typically opens the club face up, and that's why you hit those pushes a lot. So we would love to get your shaft at impact a little bit more horizontal again. We would love to get your body opening up a little bit better. But the only way we can possibly do that, we need to get you loading into this hip more. We need to get the hands a little bit deeper so we can shallow out the path of the club. That's not going to fix everything for good, but it will create a new environment so that we don't have to deliver the high handle anymore. And then from there, rotating through the ball better and all that would be a cakewalk. It would actually be really easy to do. And I guarantee you'll be more consistent almost instantly. And the only reason why I didn't pull up the other videos is because I see the same thing in every swing. So like with your wedges, with your hybrids, the wedges especially, you mentioned that you struggle a lot from 120 and in. It's because from here, you're coming in this deep into the ball. There's just no way to be consistent in how you're controlling your loft when your body has to react to the steepness and back out of it. You deliver a high handle, it adds loft, it creates an inconsistency in how the ball flies off the face, and then you can't control your spin anymore. So, of course, when it comes to wedge play, you just can't be consistent with how the ball's flying. You're not going to be consistent with your distance control.